Well, hello and welcome to another exciting segment of CincyRIMS Roll Call. I'm Adam Visnick, your host, and today we're diving deep into the dynamic world of risk and insurance management. Every episode, we have the unique privilege of introducing you to the brilliant minds that shape our community, sharing insights and expertise that will keep us at the forefront of innovation and excellence. Today, we're absolutely thrilled to have a distinguished guest, a pivotal figure who's been instrumental in steering the course of risk management, not just in our community, but across the industry. Stay tuned as we unravel the journey, the challenges, and the victories that he's encountered. And without further ado, please join me in welcoming Michael Epstein. Hi, Mike. How you doing?
Hi, gang. And Adam, I just want to let everybody know you told me this is the inaugural one, so everyone bear with me and forgive me errors and confusion. So, Adam, I guess you want me to start off with a little bit about who I am.
Please fire away. Yeah.
Yep. Hi, gang. So Mike Epstein. I have, from a risk management perspective, I have been doing risk for about 10 years. And in fact, we're recording this at the end of October. In February, I will hit my 10-year anniversary from a risk perspective. My career has started and still includes business continuity. And so what we're going to talk about today is a career and a set of experience that culminated in my current role as Vice President of Risk Management, Business Continuity, Physical Security, and Real Estate for Scripps Company. We are a national media company. We have local TV stations, 60 or so fully built out local TV stations in Cincinnati here, WCPO, Channel 9 in town. And then we own a number of national networks. So everything from Scripps News to Court TV to Ion to Bounce, Grit, Laugh, and a couple of others. So I am responsible for everything from the insurance we buy for our people, for our business, to dealing with creeps, stalkers, and weirdos. And if you're lucky, Adam will get me to tell you stories about those, to how do we respond to a hurricane when we have to evacuate a TV station that must stay on air for several days, to moving a television station and building a new building for one. So that's sort of the world I play in. And with that, Adam, I'll let you sort of drive with questions and we'll go from there.
Yeah, that's a great introduction. There's a ton to just dive into right there. And some of those are actually really good lead-ins to a bunch of my questions. You mentioned a lot of things. You're covering a lot of the United States, a lot of different markets. And there's a lot of things that could come up from a risk management side that you personally would have to deal with. So it sounds like you got a lot on your plate, but let's take a step back to like the first time you got started or even had knowledge of what your current career looked like. How did you get personally started in your career, not just in risk management, but how did you also get started at Scripps? Can you dive us into that?
Yeah, well, I'll start you way before that. So I will tell you, I am a continuity guy that does risk. And I started in business continuity almost 25 years ago with at the time, Anthem Blue Cross and Blue Shield owned a prescription benefit management company that also had a mail order pharmacy. And an executive stopped by my desk and said, here's a project. It's called business continuity. Do not hang on to it. It's a hot potato. You don't want this to be your career. And I was young, just starting out in business. I was a admin project coordinator role and fell in love with business continuity. The job is playing defense. I know I was never going to be the sales guy that made you $1 million. It's just not my personality. But being the first guy you call at 2 a.m. when something's going wrong, that worked for me. So I started with Y2K planning and dealing with a flood at that facility, actually up Duke Boulevard near Mason and Fields Hurdle.
Yep.
And went, spent several more years with Anthem, building their continuity program out. Then as Anthem and WellPoint merged, stayed with it for a couple of years, and then realized, as we all do, we join companies, but we usually lead managers. So I found I wanted to lead my manager, and had an opportunity with Convergys. So Convergys at the time was a global call center and HR outsourcing company. They then got rid of HR while I was there, but I've spent 7 years at Convergys. After a couple of years, was running their continuity program. And then I got a phone call, and let me tell you all, take this from someone whose father was a headhunter for a couple of decades. Always take the phone call, no matter what. Always take the phone call.
Okay.
So I called from a former executive at Convergys who'd moved over to Scripps, was Scripps CFO at the time, and said, listen, our board says we have to build a continuity program. Mike, you've done some impressive things at Convergys, and we'll talk about one of those stories in a few minutes. Come talk to us. So if you're going to go talk to somebody, they invite you to speak to them. I looked up Scripps online. Who are they? What do they do? I went in knowing they wanted to build a continuity program. I went into that meeting with a 3-page outline of what they needed to build from a business continuity perspective. But I was running a global incident management program. So 68 individual and 18 multi-site disruptions a year at Convergys, right?
Yeah.
Scripps scope was much smaller, not something that was going to be a challenge to me from a continuity perspective. But during an hour and a half conversation with the CFO and the chief admin officer, they started talking about risk management. And I literally looked at them and said, I know it. I report to the same guy that it reports to at Convergys. I haven't done it. And they looked at me and they said 2 things. 1, we think you're smart enough to do it. And 2, and this was the important part, Tim Wazlowski, who was the CFO at the time, said we will blame the brokers the first year and we'll blame you every year after that. Right? And that's how I got into risk management. And then at Scripps, and I love this company, if you raise your hand and say, hey, we need to do something, they're probably going to look at you and say, okay, can you do that for us? So I was hired to build a continuity program and run risk management. And fortunately, I had a great assistant risk manager in place that helped me get my feet under me. And then when she retired, I replaced her with Stacy Maupin, who's currently our risk manager and soon to be director of risk management for Scripps. And I will tell you, she allows me to do my job because she runs so much of the program at this point. That it is, she's just a great partner. But I raised my hand and said, listen, we need to deal with physical security threats in a standard way. We can't, and those of you who do risk, site A responds one way and site B responds another way to the same threat. You're exposing yourself to liability, right? You want to make sure you're consistent, effective, and predictable in how you deal with these things. And so the company said, yeah, okay, Mike, you deal with it. And so first couple of years, we had 120 security incidents a year. We this year have just exceeded 270, and it's late October.
Wow.
And then at one point, I had somebody, actually that CFO stop by my desk and say, listen, we need to build out a couple of sites. You seem to understand buildings and how they work because of my continuity background and my insurance learning, and I do woodworking as a hobby. So because I know how to use power tools, I got real estate for Scripps. So we built out 100,000+ square feet of office space prior to 3 years ago, and did well enough at that about 2.5, 3 years ago, we sold one of our buildings in Denver. And in March, April next year, we will open its replacement, a 86,000 square foot facility that I am overseeing the remodeling and construction for. So my career has sort of been this guy who deals with problems, guy who understands risk, guy who, or person who, judgment, right? The real driver of what I've built my career to be as I've added these different responsibilities is leadership has looked at me and said, when everything's going wrong, you seem to make good decisions. You seem to talk to the right people and get things done. And that's what sort of led me here.
Yeah. No, that's such a great story. And it sounds like you've got enterprise experience having come from the Convergys world. It sounds like you have hobbies that also played a factor in whether or not you're the go-to resource for the risk management and business continuity side and then the real estate side. And with all those pieces, that's a lot of hats to wear. Now, if you were to sum up in one or two sentences what a risk manager title actually does, I know you said a lot of things. How would you describe that if you could be even more concise about what risk managers do?
Yeah, so I'm going to adjust the risk management component of my scope of responsibilities.
Mhm.
At Scripps, it's a little bit different. The traditional risk management is we buy insurance and we administer claims, right? So whether it's the D&O insurance for our executives, whether it's the workers' comp and auto coverage, every business has its own professional liability insurance. For us, that's media liability, right? What we say and how we say things about others. So there's that piece of things, and then the claims related to it, right? Workers' comp claims, auto claims, programs to try to mitigate, right? So if we have a lot of auto claims that are the result of certain behaviors, let's educate our employees to reduce that behavior type. Slip, trips, and falls, kind of a classic workers' comp claim for most companies.
Mm-hmm.
Hey, let's remind our people wear the right shoes in winter, right? We have reporters that go out in severe weather and other situations. Let's educate them about what their risks can be in the field to reduce that likelihood of a claim. And then at Scripps, the other side of risk management that's a little bit unique for us, compared to Adam, most of the people that are maybe listening. We currently we have a war going on in Ukraine, and we have now a war, about to have a war in Israel with Hamas. We have journalists there, right? We have a journalist that literally picked up from Ukraine and flew into Israel as it broke out there a couple of weeks ago. Is it safe to go? If it is safe to go, how are we going to go? Are we taking security with us? How comfortable and how long are we going to be there? So that's another aspect of the risk profile thing that we deal with. As a humorous story, you guys have all seen on the news the reporter who goes and flies with the Blue Angels, right? Well, from a risk perspective, that waiver that the Blue Angels is going to make your employees sign says that not only can they not sue, but their heirs can't sue, right? Now, do we let that reporter go do that story? Right? If they get hurt, it's a workers' comp claim. That's my money. The government's not going to pay for it, right? Sure. So making sure, yes, we do allow that reporter to do that story, but let's have a conversation, right? And that's a lot of what risk management is. It's talking to leaders, talking to people in the business to say, listen, you can make that decision, but let me tell you what the pluses and minuses are. And if the plus for you is $10 and the potential minus is negative 1,000, let's talk through how you're going to make that decision, right? And so, as an example, the Blue Angels one, when your heirs can't sue, a significant portion of our reporters go, hey, maybe there's another way I can do that story. There's a group that will certainly go up and do it, and it's a group that has a traditional risk profile. So when I get that phone call or that email, I can pretty much predict who's going to do it and who isn't. But I got to admit, I would love that opportunity. But I have to set aside my personal interests, what's right for the company, right? Yep. And have those conversations. And so a risk manager, and I get, Adam, I warned you I could be long-winded. A risk manager is there to help the company think through those pluses and minuses, the positives and negatives, and to help, hopefully, if we're successful, build a culture and drive education so that people at least stop and think, hey, there's a risk to what we're going to do. Does it make sense for us to do this? Yeah.
Yeah. That's a great definition. And in the back of my mind, honestly, when you're talking about the Blue Angels, I think anybody would love to, as long as they're not afraid to heights or have some stomach, they would love to get on that. And it sounds like there's a little bit of Mike, you're the no fun team here, but you're outweighing the negatives over the positives. And so everybody wants to get on that Blue Angels flight, but because there's no insurance that can potentially do it, or there's errors that could happen, you have to step in and say, let's not do that for fear that we might lose some business or something could go awry. And certainly we don't want to have that happen. But excellent story. And it sounds like, if I'm also leading into the question, like, how were you able to grow your career? I think you already answered in certain respects that leadership came to you. You had teams or parts of teams that would help you as a leader, but they would come to you because they said, hey, Mike knows how to solve this problem. He's got some skill set. He understands what's the objective here. Has that helped you grow your career in risk management, Mike?
Oh yeah, and the biggest piece is probably the fact that whether it's business continuity or risk management, none of the people I work with for the most part report to me, right? I sit in the little side. I have a risk management director. I've got a real estate person. I've got a physical security person. That's it. That's the team, right? But we accomplish business continuity exercises at every location. We do active shooter education at every one of our locations. We do risk training and education across the board. And what you do is, as I built those relationships with, and I'll use our Fort Myers TV station as an example, that building really shouldn't be occupied in anything above a Cat 2 hurricane. And they've had a couple of them in the past few years.
Yeah.
So working with that team to build a relationship with a local, actually in this case, Florida Gulf Coast University. So when Hurricane Ian last year hit Fort Myers, and actually just north of Cape Coral, where our building is, for 3 days, we were running out of Florida Gulf Coast University. There was no one in our building.
Wow.
Staff was at FGCU on air, telling their community what's going on. And that's one of the big, interesting things about the news business. We can't be off air, right?
Yep.
And when everybody else is running from the hurricane and shutting things down, we are bringing everybody in, staying overnight, feeding them, right? Sleeping in the building, because we need to be on air telling our viewers what is really life and death information, right? Hey, this is when it's going to be the worst. This is when you need to be hunkered down, et cetera, right? And think about it. That's probably not on TV. That's on phones, right? Power's out throughout the area. We've got a generator keeping us up and running, and those people are relying on that information. And so what leadership saw was able to accomplish tasks with a group of people that respected me but didn't report to me, right? They were willing to do it because I was able to convince them this is worth it. This is why. Let me help you, right? And that biggest point, yeah, sometimes risk people can be called the no fun police. But our job is to try to say yes, right? Listen, I want to say yes. Here's what I'm worried about. Actually had a conversation a couple of weeks ago where one of our people called us and was talking about content that somebody else created that we were going to put on air. And there's a risk to that, right? Would you sell a product that somebody else made and handed to you? Well, guys, they've got to have insurance. And this was a small entity that had created this content. They don't have insurance. But, okay, are we willing to review that content and vet it the same way we would our own content? Yeah, we can do that. Well, then you're fine. Our own insurance will cover if you're willing to own that content by vetting it the same way we would other things, right? It's that type of collaboration with the business that has helped me build the reputation that has allowed me to have the job I have. And Adam, I'll throw one other point in there, given today in the world we live in. Today I am in my office at corporate headquarters. Thursdays and Fridays I work from home, right? A significant portion of our corporate staff is able to work from home full time. But those opportunities I've had are difficult to come by if people aren't seeing you. Now that doesn't mean you have to be in the office, but that does mean then that you've got to schedule the meetings. You've got to do the, hey, coffee one-on-ones to let people know what you're accomplishing, what challenges you've had, and how you've worked through them so that they're willing to give you that opportunity. There's no way I'd be in the position I'm in today without people seeing what I've been able to accomplish.
That last point is actually really powerful. I think nowadays, and we've talked about this in my groups, everyone's working remote. How do you get those quote unquote water cooler interactions or those passing in the hallway interactions where you can see the people face to face? Obviously, everybody had come out of COVID. Nobody wanted to go back to work. Now we're starting to force people to go back to work once a week, 3 times a week, once a week for the whole month, whatever it might be. How do you now navigate knowing that you have remote workers, sometimes leaders are remote, and still make that impact? Is it something you've had to personally do to transform as a leader And how do you go about doing that so those same interactions you had can now be used in today's day and age?
I will tell you, I like being in the office 3 days a week. Um,
Mhm.
And because I regularly will go out and just grab one of our executives. Hey, we need to have a quick decision. Let's do this. Let's move on. But
Mhm.
I have 3 direct reports who each run their own little, portions of my scope of responsibility that are all virtual. And so it's been working with them and how can I make sure they're connecting with the right people? I mentioned Stacy Maupin earlier. She's
Mhm.
got great relationships with our engineers and getting the rest of the company to recognize she's built those relationships. Actually, asking her to do a couple things every now and then that she may not be so happy about doing because it sounds like it's extra work, but it's showing leaders, hey, you know what? Yeah, I can get you that data. And you know how I did it? Stacy's got a great relationship with every chief engineer we have. She was able to chase down the data. She was able to solve the problems and build a database that now answers all these questions that you had,
Mhm.
right? So now her name is tied to that project, right? Because that's really, if you're not going to be seen, that's one of the big components. The other thing is, frankly, talking to management. In some cases, that might be, asking my direct reports, hey, get time on my boss's schedule. And just, I don't know, I don't care if you're telling him how I'm doing, or you're telling him what your favorite hobby is, how your kids are doing in school. Develop that relationship so they know you, they understand who you are. And then when I'm talking to them about you, they connect a little better, right? And that helps them be more comfortable when the next big project comes along, whether it is a acquisition, which Scripps has done quite a few of, or some other business project. You're able to say, hey, I think Stacy would be great in that role. They connect the name with a project that was completed. They connect the name with those couple of conversations, either in person or virtually, and they're more comfortable to say, yeah, okay, let's put Stacy on that project.
Wonderful. I
Hopefully
love
she
that.
doesn't get upset. Nobody tell her I'm mentioning her. Okay.
We're going to tag her on this interview when posted. And I love the discussion about obstacles because that's one of the big questions, like what obstacles you have on a daily basis. And you mentioned many. You got people in Ukraine, Israel, you've got sites all over the country, you've got remote work to deal with, you've got a lot of hats on top of all that, and you're able to still bring it together and kind of be concise about what it is you do, even though there's many tasks you specifically do, and how you get people on board through your movement. So that's awesome to talk about, and I think it's going to be valuable for people watching this. It's like, how can I do the exact same things if I have a similar type of job description as you, Mike? And so, with all that said, all those pieces that you've talked about, your story, where you came from, your obstacles, the places you've been, the places what is going on in your career now? What kind of obstacles are you facing, and what maybe is happening in the future that you're thinking about from a business continuity standpoint? Maybe you can talk about some of those things for our audience.
Sure. The scariest thing on my 12-month horizon is next year's election.
Mhm.
When the former president, like him or hate him, specifically says media is the problem, we get a lot of threats. Yes, Fox News and One America are right-wing conservative, and MSNBC and to a certain degree CNN can be looked at as more left-leaning. Your local news, for the most part, isn't trying to be political. Now, there are some. We've got a couple of competitors that have specifically said that they're going to take a political position. Scripps is a roughly 145, 150-year-old company.
Mhm.
Our job, our motto is give light and let the people find their own way, right? That's, our symbol's a lighthouse. I do woodworking. I actually built it. That's what that table is, if there wasn't junk sitting on it. But that does mean that there are people out there who believe that we are the problem. The security incidents, the physical security of our people, our ability to just tell people what's going on. We report. And one of the interesting things, our president, Adam Simpson, who started off as an investigative journalist, made a comment to me years ago. One of the reasons that media has a liberal label is we tell people the world is changing. We report on electric cars, right? The country needs are building more electric cars are selling, etc. People look at that as liberal. We're supporting electric cars. We're reporting on it. That's all we're trying to do, right? We're telling people the sky is blue, when it rains, the earth gets wet, but there are people that aren't so happy with some of those messages, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so what we have gotten over the past couple of years, we have always had the aluminum foil hat people, right? You're beaming thoughts into my head. That's always been a portfolio of the concerns we get from a security perspective.
Yeah.
We've always had the people too enamored with our on-air talent. Right?
Yeah.
This politically motivated piece is relatively new. And it is probably a little more vitriolic than anything else we've seen, or actually I should say not a lot more vitriolic. It is driving changes in the other two, right? The politicization of our community, of our society, is driving more people that are believing conspiracy theories, which is a bigger set of threats from one end. It's setting a expectation around, and I'll be frank here, largely men expecting certain levels of attention from women. Not all men by any means, but there's certainly a portion of our culture of males that think they are deserving of a certain amount of attention that is, again, enhancing that side of the security profile that we deal with. So there's certainly that piece. The other things, environmental, right? Environment is changing, hands down, no question. For my business, it is a big minus, but it's also a big plus, right? That site that has to be evacuated above a Cat 2 hurricane in Fort Myers is going to be more storms. But at the same time, there's a value to my business. If we're providing news, if we're telling people what the weather is like, if we're telling people what's happening in a community at risk, right? When that event happens, whether it's a wildfire, it's a hurricane, it's an earthquake, it's a tornado, it's a chemical spill, we're the people, hopefully, that others are turning to find out about it, right? So it's that whole crisis as opportunity thing. That we just, and my role is both on the risk side and the continuity side and the security side to help the company balance where's our exposure, how much of this are we participating in, how are we reporting on it safely, what is the directive from leadership on, right? And how do we take that action in a manner that as a risk manager, I can comfortably look at our leadership and our board and say, yes, we are doing these things, but we're doing them in a responsible manner. And I'll tell you, one of the great opportunities I have working at Scripps, the leaders I work with are intelligent and they have good intent, right? And that's probably a bigger deal than everybody might initially realize. If you're working in an environment where the people don't have good intent, that's not a healthy place to be. If you're working in an environment where people are very reactionary and not kind of proactive in thinking about what risks and what opportunities may be ahead of you, that's maybe not where you want to spend your career. And so I've had the fortunate opportunity to end up at a company that I know is trying to do the right thing because I see the thought process. I get the questions from our leaders on, hey, could we do this versus that? When I respond in a non-positive way, I see them frustrated with me, but I also see the wheels turning. Hey, okay, Mike highlighted this risk for me. I've got to solve that. Now, 9 times out of 10, they come back and say, hey, Mike, we're solving for that. And the remainder, we're going to ask you to risk transfer by buying insurance for it. Okay, that's what I'm here for. But that's sort of when I think about what's coming down the pipeline, the change in environment and the risks to our businesses from that are a big one that everybody needs to deal with. I certainly know in my world, security is a big one. I would also posit that everybody, depending on where you are, California just passed a law that effective in January, we have to have workplace violence protocols and training, et cetera, right? California, as you guys know, kind of leads the nation in a lot of these things. If as a risk manager, you're not working with your company to make sure you have prevention programs for violence in the workplace. How do I identify an employee that might be at risk, not to fire them, but to provide them support and resources, right? you've got a trained asset there. You don't want to have to get rid of that trained asset because of an acute challenge they might be facing. If we can find a safe way to get them help, get them support, and have them stay with that organization and continue contributing. Yes, there are times we need to go the other way. And I've had to make sure we have policies in place so that, our security director and I get that phone call to say, hey, Mike, we've got an employee challenge rather than an external challenge. But it's thinking through all those things and convincing leadership it's worth spending time on.
That's a great answer. And it sounding like that you get buy-in from your executives, those above you, and you have an ear to speak to, and they can empower you to make decisions, or at least make a calculation on what the next risk is super important. It sounds like you're in the right spot and you're making a big change within your industry as well as without. And I hope that your obstacles coming up here, namely the election, pay off. And I think you provided some big insight as to what happens internally for a company like Scripps when thinking about that election coming up, because we know all the variables surrounding what happens. So super important stuff there, and it's a lot to chew on. We only have a couple minutes left, Mike, so I'm going to do what we are calling the CincyRIMS rapid fire questions for people specifically in and around Cincinnati. These are classic Cincinnati questions. There's only a couple of them, so I'm going to start firing away. Ready?
Right.
All right. First question, Gold Star or Skyline Chili?
Neither. Tony Pacos, I grew up in Toledo, Ohio. What these people call chili is sauce. Next question.
Bold statement there. I don't know if that's going to rattle the cages of Cincinnatians here, but let's move on. So you mentioned you're from Toledo. What high school did you go to?
Ottawa Hills High School in Toledo, and then Kenyon College in Central Ohio for college.
All right, cool. And lastly, another loaded question here, since you come from the Toledo world: Reds, Bengals, or FCC?
I got to go with Bengals. I believe it or not, actually played a little football in college. Kenyon allowed me to play because I had a pulse. I didn't practice. I practiced very well. But I learned team playing football. I had run track all through high school, senior year in high school, and then my first 2 years of college, I played football. And there's actually a greater Cincinnati area. There is a businessman here in town. So Town Properties, Ryan Bortz is their one of if not their senior executive. Went to my alma mater. He was a couple years ahead of me, and he pulled me aside one day and kind of said, "Listen, Mike, on the field, you're not going to be a leader, but in the weight room, you can be." And it sort of put me in this. It gelled for me an understanding of, I had done individual sports, running track, racing bicycles. Football was a team event, and I don't care how good your quarterback and receiver is, if they don't have a line protecting them. And in Cincinnati, we know how important a line is, right? We have an amazing quarterback, but we've had a couple of great ones in the past that weren't protected. Joe Burrow wasn't protected early on, and we saw what happened, as a result of that. But your defense has to be able to work together. Your offense has to be able to work together. They have to understand the schemes the coach is putting together, right? Your coach has to either build a strategy around the people they have or find the people they need to enact that strategy, right? There are a lot of parallels. People always say, here's the parallel. Football is life. Football is life, but football is a great example of how an organization can work together to accomplish a goal, right? And so, I will admit, FC Cincinnati, love the new stadium. Not a big soccer fan because my younger brother was very good at soccer, so of course I'm not gonna enjoy that. Baseball, I have a fake tooth because I was hit in the mouth with a baseball in Little League, so I'm not going to enjoy that. So again, go Bengals. Hooday.
And I love the point at the very end where you kind of made a little reference to risk management. Joe Burrow can drop back for a deep pass to Jamar Chase, but if he doesn't have those 5 risk managers, aka his offensive line, to block him, he's going to be in a world of hurt, as he was a couple of years ago. So with that, I will sign off. Mike, it's been an absolute pleasure having you on as our guest. I appreciate the awesome stories. You were the quote-unquote guinea pig on our inaugural CincyRIMS Roll Call. Again, I'm Adam Visnick, and thanks for allowing me to be your host. We'll catch you next time.
Hi, gang.